Hey friends, my name is Erin. It is officially the new year, but before we move on, I wanted to show you my top 5 in each genre. I thought this would be a really fun way to look back at my year and look at the best books that I've read. I'm not going to do every genre, but I am going to do 8 separate lists. Not all of them have all 5, but I think most of them do. So, I'm excited to show you some books. Hopefully you get some recommendations. Hopefully you get some inspiration for this upcoming reading year. And let's get started. I am going to start with the classics. Now, classics aren't always my favorite genre, but I did find some that I really was surprised by and enjoyed. The first one that I read that I was surprised by, definitely surprised by, was Birdsong by Sebastian Fox. And in this, we're following 2 generations, a grandfather and a granddaughter, and it focuses on his life in the war, and slowly you see that start to impact his granddaughter's life as she's kind of learning more about his story. I did not like the beginning, and I did not like the end. In fact, I could have done without the granddaughter altogether. But I think it was one of the best war depictions in a classic that I've seen so far, and the middle part just totally blew me out of the water. Let's move on to number 2. I have Ray Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. For whatever reason, I had never read this, even though it's so short. Yeah, I never really read a lot of classics. It's one of my goals to read more classics, and this one I adored. Like, it's such a good dystopian, it has such a good premise and message. So in this book, we have a firefighter, and during this part of our history, the firefighters don't stop fires, they start fires. And usually they start fires to burn books because books have been banned. For number 3, I have Where the Red Fern Grows by Wilson Rowles. So I had read this before, and some of these on these lists are going to be rereads, but they're so good that they deserve another mention. This one is a sad book, but so lovable. You follow a boy who saves up money for years to get hunting dogs, and then you watch them kind of grow and learn together, and beautiful. For number 4, I have Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. Gosh, this book, I think part of the reason it's on this list is because I was so proud to finish it because it took me forever. I did really enjoy the main character's kind of timeline and her struggle and the way she overcame things, even her romances. Now, there is a lot of political monologuing in this that I could have done without, but I still think it deserves a mention because I thought I was going to struggle through this entire book, and I did struggle. But I also really enjoyed it, way more than I thought, so it made the list. The last one on this list is Hamlet by William Shakespeare. I had never really read Shakespeare. I think in high school I read A Midsummer Night's Dream, and that's the only one I'd read so far. So I've been trying to read more Shakespeare, and Hamlet was one of my favorites so far. I thought it was amazingly fun, but also just super tragic and a good mix of all of it. So I really enjoyed this one, and it comes in at number 5 on the classics list. We're going to move on to genre number 2, and that is going to be my graphic novel collection. I read a few graphic novels this year, and I really enjoyed almost all of them that I read. Here are my top 5. I'm going to start with number 1 and work my way down. I don't know why I'm doing it that way, but that's how I did the first one, so that's how we're going to do all of them. My favorite graphic novel this year was The Prince and the Dressmaker. This is an adorable story of a prince who likes to wear dresses, so he hires a dressmaker, helps him just really fulfill his life. And I mean, the graphics I love. The art is beautiful, and the story is heartwarming. The dresses in here I want to wear every day of my life. So this gets the number 1 spot. Number 2 goes to a manga, and that is Orange by Ichigo Takano. So in this book, we follow a girl who is part of a friend group that you're going to fall in love with, and she gets a letter from her future self saying you've got to do these things to stop a tragedy in your friend group. And I really fell in love with this friend group. And once I learned what the potential tragedy was, I could not put it down. I think I read this chunker in like 2 days. I mean, to be fair, it is a manga, but I breezed through this and it was so good. The number 3 spot goes to Saga. I only read volume 1. There's a lot of volumes in this. I'm hoping to read volume 2 in January. You can check out my TBR. But in this, we have two people who fall in love, except for they're on opposite sides of a war, and that means everybody's after them. So they have a baby. The baby is the narrator, which is super unique, and I loved. It also has really cool species that you meet throughout, and it's just a really good start to a story. For number 4, I read Adventure Zone, and this follows the McElroy brothers and the McElroy family as they play D&D. There are some really great D&D characters in this, and if you play D&D or like that kind of style, you would enjoy this. There's some characters that are so sassy, it's amazing, and the McElroy brothers are hilarious. If you haven't checked out their podcasts, they have tons of them, and you should. And then number 5, I have Monstrous by Marjorie Liu. This one is another one that it just says stunning art. I've mentioned this before, but how can you not love a book that has cats in it? I did put this in number 5 because the storyline in this one is a little confusing, but I am excited to get into volume 2 to kind of learn more about what's happening. It was a pretty good setup, in my opinion. Let's look at some nonfiction next. For the first spot in my nonfiction, I put a kids book, Women in Science. This follows 50 fearless pioneers. The first thing is, again, I love the art style. It is so easy to read. It gives you just enough information to get you intrigued and really learn about a character. It has some facts off to the side, and it's just a really good source of information, whether you're a kid or an adult. Not only that, but I felt like I learned a lot in a pretty short amount of time. Moving on to spot number 2, I have Born a Crime. This is Trevor Noah's memoir. It is such a good memoir. It has just the right balance of like funny little stories from his childhood and actual information and kind of deep looks into his life and the apartheid that he grew up in. So you get a good mix of both, and I think it made it a really enjoyable and insightful read. Number 3 is another memoir, and that is A Long Way Gone by Ishmael Bey. This is about Ishmael and his life growing up as a child soldier, how it affected him, how he survived throughout that time in his life, and how he kind of justified that. It was such an honest and deep look at something so personal that I was just amazed. I think it was a really good book. I do wish it had gone more into like his future and his life now, but if you're looking for a good nonfiction, this is a kind of an older one, but a good one. For number 4, I actually kind of have a collection of books, and that is the Who Was series. I've read Who Was Rosa Parks and a few others this year. And again, I think it's just a really good source of information, especially for kids, but even for adults. It's a quick read. It kind of refreshes your memory on people you've probably heard about, or maybe you haven't. And I've learned something new every time I've read these, which I didn't really expect. For book number 5, I have 3 Signs of a Miserable Job. I forget the author, but I'll put it up here. I just recently read this. My dad gave it to me, and to be honest, I did not think I was going to like it. And I did. And I think it had some good insight into running a business, which may not be applicable to everybody. Certainly isn't applicable to me as like a teacher, but it was really insightful. And as far as like self-help business books go, I found it really enjoyable to read, which surprised me because I don't usually lean towards these kind of books. Let's look at historical fiction. I don't think any of you are going to be surprised about this first one. I love this book, and I definitely said that a few times as I was reading it, and it's come up in a few of my like important books, favorite books. It was a reread for me this year, but the number 1 spot goes to The Book Thief by Marcus Zusak. This follows death as a narrator, which is already unique, and he reads the story of a girl who is surviving in World War II. It is very flowery and poetic writing, which can take a second to get into, but is totally worth it. I tear up every time I read this. I've probably read it 4 or 5 times, by now, and it still is just amazing every time. The number 2 spot is a close favorite to The Book Thief, and that is Codename Verity by Elizabeth Wynne. In this book, we follow 2 best friends, and the friendship in this is probably my favorite friendship I've ever read in any book, but they are both pilots and kind of spies working for the British government, again during World War II, and it follows kind of one getting captured and tortured, and she's revealing things that you aren't sure if she's supposed to. You're wondering if her friend is alive or dead. Is she going to be able to escape? And it is such an intense book, and honestly, the friendship in this just, I love it. It's such a good book, and I've read this one a few times as well. I think this is my 3rd reread, and again, I just love it every single time, which I think is incredible because I don't reread very often. Next up on my list, I'm not entirely sure this is historical fiction, but it was kind of listed as that, and that is Shadow of the Wind by Carlos Ruiz Zafran. This is a slower book, but so beautiful, and it just really grips you. It's about books, first of all. How can you not love a book about books? But you follow a boy who finds a book and realizes that most of the copies are being destroyed. Someone is targeting these books. He's trying to figure out more about the author and the author's life, who's destroying the books, and someone actually comes up to him and offers to buy it from him. He doesn't give it to him, but they kind of threaten that there are going to be consequences to saying no. So it is a little bit slower, but there are so many lovable characters, and the story is so beautifully told that I loved it. Number 4 is a reread as well, and that is Troy by Adele Garris. In this book, we follow the story of Troy, but this time we follow it through the eyes of some random sisters that are kind of put in the story to see it through new eyes, and it works so well because everybody knows the story of Troy, but seeing it from a different point of view and a girl's point of view is so refreshing. You also get a good look at the gods and how the gods work, and one of my favorite things is you get to see the after effects. What happens after Troy? Because we don't ever really hear that. Definitely pick this one up if you're interested in a Troy retelling. Another mythological retelling is Circe by Madeline Miller. This one is another one that was a little bit slow, but I enjoyed every minute of it. It tells the story of Circe, who is daughter of Apollo, and she gets banished because people think she's just kind of meh. And so it's her story kind of surviving that banishment, living on her own, people who come to her island, and the stories that happen when they do. It's a really good look at her life. I do think, again, it was a little bit slow there, but I think it made up for it just in the general storytelling, and I always love a good look into mythology, so it definitely deserves this spot on the list. Alright, we're going to move into middle grade. The first one up on our list is The Mysterious Benedict Society by Trenton Stewart. Double check me over here. So this follows 4 genius kids as they work through puzzles and solve mysteries and different clues to try and save the world, of course. It's a really enjoyable read. It's pretty quick considering how thick the book is. I think it's just a fun read. And what else do you want out of a middle grade, you know? For spot number 2, we have A Tale Dark and Grim by Adam Gidwitz. So I was so surprised by this book. I've been putting off reading it forever. You can see that I've definitely tabbed things, which is surprising because I just honestly wasn't expecting to enjoy this book, but I did. It follows Hansel and Gretel. It's not a retelling at all. It follows them, and it does not hesitate to get dark. It has amazing life lessons that just spoke to me even as an adult and put things into words that I would have struggled with myself. And so you get a good mix of fairy tale and life lessons, and it's so dark in just the best way. I also have Howl's Moving Castle by Diane Wynne Jones. This book was so whimsical, so magical. I adored reading it. My sister just read it and loved it as well, and I'm excited to see the movie now. It does have a Studio Ghibli movie out that I've heard is a little bit different, but also enjoyable. For book number 4, I have a classic, and that is Bunnicula. If you have not read Bunnicula, it's a good one and a short one. It follows a dog and a cat as your narrators, and they get a new pet rabbit that may be a vampire. and it's so funny. There are a few adult jokes that go over your head as a kid that you find in here, and I just love when that happens. Fifth up, I have Making Bombs for Hitler. This was another historical fiction that I read, and I read a few historical fictions set in World War II for kids, and this was definitely the best one that I found. It does a good job of portraying the violence and the scale of death without being too much for that age group. And I was really surprised by how much I was invested in this story and how many steps above the others that I read it really was, because it was leaps and bounds better than some of the others. Our next spot is going to be my favorite standalone. I'm going to start with World War Z by Max. This does have some companion novels, but I'm focusing really on this one by itself because I was so surprised by it. It was so amazing. It's set in like an interview style, and it covers so many things about a zombie apocalypse that I had never considered. I've read a lot of zombie books because I do love a good zombie book, and this one was so unique, and it's nothing like the movie. I ranted about that a little bit, but it is not. So if you've read the movie and you're like, I don't know about read the book. It's really good, and I think it is so unique that it deserves the top spot. Another one with a few companion novels is Take a Hint, Danny Brown. This is by Talia Hibbert. It's one of the few romances I read this year, and it was a book that I loved. I've re-listened to little parts that I love from it throughout the year. I immediately went and picked up the second Sisters book, and I'll probably pick up the third Sisters book as soon as it comes out. So if you're looking for good romance with great representation, positive messages, and just so much fluff and adorable love, look at Talia Hibbert. Spot number 3 goes to The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstein. This is one I heard about when I first started watching BookTube about 2 years ago, and so I picked it up. It was pretty early on my list of books to buy, and I loved it. I really enjoyed it. It was such a good romance and such a whimsical story, and just the atmosphere in this book is so intense. You can picture it so vividly. Yeah, I really liked it. The ending is a little, but I think the atmosphere itself is a reason to read this. Spot number 4 goes to In the Deep by Lorith White. This was a NetGalley book that I read that was so good, because my other NetGalley book was not that good. But this one is a psychological thriller. It has about every trigger warning in the book. There's a lot of gore and assault, but it all builds and keeps you invested, and the twist in this just blew my mind. I loved this. It came out in 2020, and you should pick up a copy if you haven't. Alright, let's move on to series starters. Now, these are just the first book in the series, and honestly, I could have picked a lot more than 5, but these were my top 5. So we're going to start with Guards by Terry Pratchett. This is the first book in the Nightwatch part of Discworld, but it is not the first book in like the chronological order. It's kind of a parody on a lot of those fantasy tropes that we know and love, from the Chosen One to the common dragon tropes to evil magicians. It's just amazing. It is so funny and so enjoyable. I loved the dragons in this, and I can't wait to read more about the Night Watch. For book number 2, I can't have these top 5 without Brandon Sanderson being in there, and I read The Final Empire. This is the first book in Mistborn Era 1. It follows Vin, who discovers some magical abilities involving metals that they ingest, and that gives them powers. She has some special abilities that are pretty rare, and she's going to use that to change the world. I really loved the characters in this. I think it was a good start to the series. I'm excited to keep reading. I was supposed to read book 2 in December and didn't get to it, but it's going to be a priority for me. After that, I recently finished Murderbots book 1. This is All System Red by Martha Wells. It's a nice short book, so if you're looking for a quick introduction into a series, I would definitely recommend this one. It follows an AI who has become sentient. They call themselves Murderbot. They're supposed to be doing security, but all they really want to do is watch TV. They're so sassy and awkward that they spoke to my soul. I could relate to an AI in this, and I thought that was so amazing. Next up is another little book, and so another good quick start, and that is Every Heart a Doorway by Shannon McGuire. In this, we follow a kid who has come back from an alternate reality, and she goes to a school where everybody's kind of struggling with coming back from good worlds, bad worlds, crazy worlds, and they just can't quite cope with being back in our world. On top of that, there is some mystery and some pretty dark stuff happening. It has great representation, and it's just a good story. And in spot number 5, I have Eye of the World by Robert Jordan. This is book number 1 in the Wheel of Time. I tabbed the crap out of it, and I really enjoyed it. It was a little bit slow in the middle, but by the end of it, I was really invested and willing to read a 14-book series, so it's got to be good. I think this is worth the investment. Like I said, I'm only on book 4, so who knows how I'll feel by the end of it, but this is a good start to that world. The last category that I have for my top 5 is sequels. These are going to be follow-ups to some series that I've read, whether it be book 2 to book 5. They're just really good additions to whatever series they are a part of. And the first one that I have is One Dark Throne by Kendra Blake. This is the second book. It has 3 sisters who each have a skill: naturalist, poisoner, or elemental magic, and they are fighting to be the queen. So the first book kind of sets all that up. There's a little bit of a twist at the end, and then this book follows them kind of starting that battle, vying for suitors, and one sister just really going crazy. And it's a really good follow-up. I was just as excited to read this. It kept me going, didn't have any of that middle book syndrome. I think there are 4 in this series, and I bought the 3rd one right after I finished this one. The second spot goes to Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. I read Six of Crows a while ago, like 3 years ago maybe? 2 or 3 years ago, and I liked it, but it didn't really live up to all the hype I had heard. I enjoyed it, but I wasn't like in love with it, so I'd been putting off reading Crooked Kingdom, and when I drew it, I was a little hesitant. But I liked this book way more than the first one. I think it is a good sequel. It's a duology with some other books in the same universe, the Grishaverse. This one is easily my favorite of the 2. I think the characters have been developed. There's a little bit higher stakes in this one, which is something I struggled with in the first, and I really loved the way everything came together. Our 3rd spot goes to Monsters of Men by Patrick Ness. This is part of the Chaos Walking trilogy, and it is book number 3 in that trilogy. There's actually going to be a movie coming out, which I am not sure about, but we'll see. I read the first book in 2015. I read the second one in like 2018, so it has taken me forever to finish this, but I was really pleasantly surprised. This book is nonstop action from page 1 to page 500. It is going strong. There is not a break. Things just are constantly happening, and so it made for a really quick read and a really good read. I think the resolution is done pretty well, and again, the stakes are high enough that you felt invested and satisfied. In spot number 4, I have The Dragon Reborn by Robert Jordan. This is book number 3. I've read 4 of them so far, and book number 3 is my favorite. I think the ending was the most satisfying ending of the 4 that I've read so far, and there are a few prophecies and visions that come up that make that little travel bit in the middle more enjoyable. So book number 3 is definitely my favorite that I've read so far. I've heard book number 4 was most people's favorite, but no, book number 3 for me. So there we have it, my top 5 in different genres that I read. There are definitely other good books that I've read this year, but these were the ones that really stuck out and would love to talk to other people about. They're the ones I enjoyed the most and the ones that I remember the most. So let me know if you have a top 5 or any books you would recommend from your 2020 reading year. I'd like to say that I could always use more book recommendations, but my list to check out is like 300 books long, so, but you know, I don't know if that's a problem or a blessing. Anyway, have a great year. I'm excited to keep reading with you, and I will see y'all later. Bye!